Thanks for joining today, and welcome to the first in our five-point series with respect to magnetism and MacPhie's magnetism philosophy. My name's Hugh, and I work with MacPhie, and I'm really excited to be sharing not only this presentation, but the other presentations in this series that we're hosting related to magnetism, why we believe so much in magnetism, and how magnetism can help make organizations such as yours more magnetic. And so throughout this series, we'll be sharing details related to key questions that when organizations answer them and really think about them, they can help increase that positive attraction that they have and that you can have to people and to audiences who matter most to you. But first of all, I want to go back and I want to share a question that's fascinated me for a long time. And that question is this: what do people cheer for and why? And I'll say that one more time. What do people cheer for and why? And the reason that's so interesting to me is that if you think about it, people cheer for all kinds of different things and they cheer against all kinds of different things. And typically, we make those cheering decisions very quickly without even really being conscious of it. Now, take an example like watching Jeopardy, for instance. And if you watch Jeopardy, you find that very fast you're cheering for or cheering against some of the different competitors. And it's really interesting to deconstruct what some of the reasons why that might be. And we tend to be drawn to people who are, or that we perceive have similar interests to us or are similar to us. And the literature has all kinds of examples and all kinds of data with respect to the different components of this. But what's really fascinating is the perception of commonality. So if we perceive that someone has something in common with us, we'll be more likely to be interested in them, or to be drawn to them, or to be empathetic to them if we perceive that those commonalities exist. And if you think about it, beyond just watching Jeopardy, beyond cheering for things, an organization or set of organizations that have really figured this out are dating websites, because they have a really good idea as to what are those things that make people attracted or make things attracted to one another. And I love this example and this story, because if you think about it, there's a biological reasons why we're attracted to different people and things, and there's psychological reasons why we're attracted to different people and things. But there was a meta study done across 313 different studies. And what they found across these studies is that when it comes to affection and when it comes to who we're actually attracted to as people, that similarity was perceived to be the strongest predictor of attraction in the early stages of any relationship. So the most important thing that attracts us to others is that sense of similarity, that perceived similarity. And there's all kinds of examples of this throughout history and literature, including these little lovebirds who we see under the Eiffel Tower in Paris. But if you think about it, there's something to that. There's something to that sense of perceived similarity and that sense of perceived connection, even if that connection isn't necessarily there. But it's very profound. But beyond biological reasons and beyond psychological reasons as to why that attraction and that sense of pull is there, there are also sociological reasons and reasons that go beyond just who we inherently are. And those can include things like having gone to the same university together, or having grown up in the same town together, or having been part of the same religious denomination. So these are other sociological and contextual reasons why we may be drawn to certain people or certain ideas or to certain things. And defining all this can include understanding the psychographics, understanding the demographics of different people in one's audience. But beyond this is an even deeper sense of connection and an even deeper sense of who are those people who matter most to you as an organization, and what are those things that unite and on very subtle dimensions sometimes, those things who are important to you. So this brings us in general to the concept of magnetism. And I'll share a little bit about what magnetism is all about. So the basic premise of magnetism thinking, based on the concept of cheering and based on the concept of why we cheer for or against things, is that organizations and brands and people are sort of like magnets. We either naturally attract or naturally repel those others who matter most to us, those who are our core target audiences, our core people. And throughout this series, we're going to be going through the different key questions that we've been thinking about in MacPhie as to how your organization or your brand can be more positively attractive to those people who matter most to you, and or frankly, less negatively repellent, because there's a lot of organizations there who have audiences that matter who really want very little to do with them. And so understanding that and getting into some of the nuances to what leads us to be attracted to certain organizations, and helping organizations like yours to figure out the formula to increase that positive pull. So the first part we're going to be talking about today is knowing your people and getting a really deep and profound understanding of what unites those people who are most important to your organization. And by people, that can include your customers and clients. It can include existing staff or potential staff. It can include regulators or other hangers-on or suppliers. But to create an understanding of who are those people who matter most to you, because it's typically not the full general population across the globe. There are subsets upon subsets upon subsets who are really most important to understand and most important for you to really grasp and understand profoundly, so you can build that stronger connection with them. So this often includes defining an audience using demographics, using psychographics with respect to things like values and things like mores and things like preferences. But ultimately, what's really interesting is finding those deep threads, or those deep and profound and rich nuances that happen to bring a group of people together. And as I think about this, and as I thought about this presentation, I was taken back to my wife's 30th birthday. And being the good guy and good husband that I am, back at my wife's 30th birthday, I got her tickets to see one of her favorite bands, a band called Duran Duran. Now, many of you may not have heard of Duran Duran, but they were super popular in the late 80s and in the early 90s. And for her birthday, I got her 4 tickets to go and see Duran Duran. So Michelle, my wife, and I, and some good friends of ours, Brad and Allison, went to the Duran Duran concert, which was live and in person at the time, at what was then known as the Air Canada Centre in Toronto, Canada. And what was cool was the mood and the vibe heading into the concert itself. And I'm a pretty big Duran Duran fan myself, so I thought it was cool to be there, and really enjoyed the first few sets. But I'll be honest, after a while, it started getting a bit boring. And so there I was standing with Michelle and Allison and my buddy Brad and I. And once Brad and I got a bit bored of the music, we, being the marketing geeks that we are, started to just look around the audience and started to look around from where we could see the crowd watching this Duran Duran concert. And what we found was uncanny, because pretty much everyone who had gathered that day for that concert was identical. And by identical, I'm not kidding. It was unbelievable how similar the demographics were of the people in that crowd today. And the generic component of what we saw were typically women, typically Caucasian, typically in their late 20s and early 30s, who were probably for the most part university and college educated from in and around the Greater Toronto area. And I thought to myself, having seen this group, if we had lived in a dictatorship, and if the dictator had said, send forth for all the 30-something female, usually Caucasian, university and college educated people from around the GTA, the dictator would not have done a good job of assembling those people as simply having a Duran Duran concert. So it was really fascinating. And the geek in me really wanted to go and do like exit interviews with all of those women to find out what other interests they had, what were the books that they liked, what were the movies that they enjoyed. And my hunch is we'd found all kinds of other similarities that would have united this group. So knowing your people is so important, and understanding who your people are is so important. And music and interest in music is a really powerful shorthand for this, because oftentimes if you think about it, groups like Duran Duran have a group of people who are drawn to them. And they're not alone in this regard. And if we think about more modern examples of music, people like Beyonce, Beyonce has a huge following, and she understands deep down who her audiences are. And in her case, there's probably concentric circles of audiences, and there's the deep, profound Beyonce's fans, and then there's the quasi fans, and then those beyond that. But I gotta believe that she's got a pretty profound understanding of who they are. Similar example, our friend from Canada, Justin Bieber, he's got his believers. And the believers are a group who are passionately committed and a fan of Justin Bieber. Beyond that, people like Lady Gaga have her own sets of people who are passionate for her, and vice versa. In this case, it's her Little Monsters group. So I use the examples from music as a really powerful example of what it's like and how important it can be to have a really rich understanding and a symbiosis between yourself or your brand and the people who matter most to you, and nurturing that relationship and building that relationship and getting a deeper and richer understanding of who those people are who matter most to you is a really powerful idea, and something that is fundamental to making your organization, your brand more magnetic. What's important to think about here is the extent to which these artists all have insights and a profound understanding into those who matter most to them. And the concept of insight is so powerful. And it's so powerful to not only magnetism, but to marketing in general. And a guy named Rob Gannett, with whom I worked with years ago, had a really great definition for an insight, which was an understanding of the human condition of your target audience. I'll say that one more time. It's an understanding of the human condition of your target audience. So when you do market research, you don't always pick up on an insight easily. And it's not always a straightforward thing to do, but when you get one, it can be very powerful if you use it the right way. Now, this brings me back to my first job out of school, which was at Procter & Gamble on the Oil of Olay brand. And when I joined P&G, which is a fantastic company, great marketing company, I was on Olay. And at the time, there had been a lot of research done. There had been a lot of work done to truly understand what was happening within the context of Olay's main consumers and the beauty care segment's main consumers, which were mostly women, mostly between the ages of, say, 25 and 60. And the insight that had been uncovered at that point was that the target audience for beauty care, and for Olay in particular, had one common theme. And that insight was they were sick and tired and totally done with being told they had to look like a 16-year-old supermodel anymore. So Olay grabbed this insight and said, aha, so women don't want to be told they have to look like 16-year-old supermodels anymore. So what are we going to do with that? And in the North American business at the time, what happened was a change in the Olay tagline. So part of my job was to change all the packaging and the materials out there surrounding Olay to capture this tagline, which was a lifetime of beautiful skin. And this was the implementation of that insight to say, okay, people don't want to be told they have to look like a 16-year-old supermodel. So let's move into the concept of a lifetime of beautiful skin. So not surprisingly, Olay and P&G weren't the only company doing market research at the time, seeking rich and detailed insights into the target audience. And not surprisingly, the folks over at Unilever, which is a competitor, were doing the same thing at the same time. Now, the difference, though, with what Unilever did with that insight, which is identical to the one we had on Olay, was rather than simply change the tagline, they launched the Campaign for Real Beauty. And the Campaign for Real Beauty is an iconic case study today, but at the time, it was a revolution with respect to the beauty business. And what Dove was saying to its consumer, what Dove said to that same target audience is, we share your values. We understand where you're coming from. And we believe the same core fundamental beliefs about the world and how the world ought to be as you do. And Campaign for Real Beauty was a massive success. In North America alone, it drove their dollar volume by 18% in year one and 12% in year two. That's huge. This is a flat category. And to drive that kind of incremental business based on a campaign was pretty impressive and pretty fundamental. And it changed the way the business was perceived. But the key insight here with respect to how those insights were portrayed was, whereas at P&G and on Olay, the implementation was simply with respect to the tangible benefit. So the tangible benefit of one's skin and how one looks. What Unilever and Dove did is said, let's move beyond that. Let's get to an emotional benefit. And the emotional benefit is based on that sense of shared values and a shared understanding of what is super important to one's target audience. So this leads us to the first big question of magnetism. And the big question we're going to be talking about today is, what are your target audience's values and what's their aspirational personal identity? So we talked a little bit about values and how important values are from the Dove case study. But aspirational personal identity is a really big idea from our perspective as well. And the concept behind aspirational personal identity is this: every human being wants others to think and feel certain things about them that may be slightly better than they actually are. And the idea here isn't that we want to feel better about ourselves per se and our aspirations about ourselves, but what do those other folks around us, those people that we care about, how do we want them to perceive us? And the reason this relates to magnetism, which we'll get into over the course of the series, is if you can have that deep and profound understanding of what's important to your audience and what their aspirational personal identities are, and then through affiliation with your organization or your brand, if they can get closer to that aspirational personal identity, that can be very powerful. So through that affiliation, they feel better about how others might perceive themselves. And that's the big idea here. That's the core concept. And there's a number of different approaches, and there's a number of different ways at trying to get at that. That are long and detailed, and what we won't get into today is all those nuances, but there are a couple of things that I do want to share and that I do want to get into. And one important way of articulating and capturing who is this audience and who are these people who matter most to your organization, be they potential staff or be they potential clients or be they your broader community, is what we call a persona, and creating a personification. And a really good way of thinking about defining that persona is like a sports card. You know, it's like a baseball card or a hockey card or a football card. And the concept here is to get an understanding of who that audience is and to capture it much like you'd see on one of these cards. So there's stats, there's a person, there's where they were born, but more importantly, oftentimes, what else are they about? And what are some of their dreams, their hopes, their aspirations, their fears, their psychological nuances that for marketers and for all of us, for business people, help us to have a way deeper understanding and a richer understanding that's critically important for decision making and critically important for how you emote to the world based on that knowledge of those groups. So a few ways we get at defining personas and defining baseball cards. One of the techniques that we love in market research is getting people to tell their aspirational story. And sometimes they just write stuff down. Sometimes we get them to do collages. Sometimes we get them to take newspaper or magazine pictures and create something. And the creation in and of itself isn't what matters. What matters is why they picked those things and why they said aspirationally that was what they wanted to be. So that's one thing we've sometimes done. Another thing we've sometimes done is send people up with their phones and their cameras to just go take pictures of things that they see as aspirational to them, or that they see as ideally what they would like to have or what they would like to be about. So capturing their best self, and then again, trying to understand what was it about those images, what was it about those things that allowed us to get deeper and truly understand what that was. Third thing we do is what we call a projective technique, and particularly when the topic might be somewhat controversial. In focus groups, one of my favorite questions is not to ask a participant what they believe to be true, but what would your neighbors say about this, or what will your friends think? And by using that projection, rather than having them talk about themselves, we actually get at their truer, deeper thoughts, feelings, and beliefs on different topics. But if they say, "Wow, clearly my neighbors would love to get such and such a car or such and such a a thing that they may themselves aspire to, it gives them a little bit more permission to share their truth. Because oftentimes people don't understand their own truth. And so being able to uncover that in a rich and deep way is really quite powerful. With respect to personas and the development of personas, we've had the chance to work with a lot of organizations over the world, over the years, and throughout the world, to help them to figure this out. And one of my favorite examples comes from an organization that we support that focuses on helping companies with mental health supports and mental health programs. And I'll quickly share a couple of personas that we helped develop for them. This is Amy. And Amy does not exist. Nothing about this on this page exists in any given human being. She is a creation. She is a baseball card. But what you'll see here is the richness and the deepness with which we go to truly understand the nature of the personality of this audience, the fears of this audience, why they are the way they might happen to be. And what's important to think about here is it's rare that there's just a single card or a single persona that matters most. More often than not, we need a bunch. And so in the case for this particular client, it wasn't just Amy we defined, but we also talked about Lisa as well. And again, the details here aren't what's important. The importance is to understand the range of different key personas that may be relevant to you and to your organization, and capturing this thinking and then using those personas as prisms for decision making, as ways of thinking about how you want to communicate, and ways of thinking about what fears or concerns a potential audience might have about working with you, or dealing with you in any way, shape, or form. And it's interesting because we relate this back. If these folks were all involved in a music concert or going to say Duran Duran, my hunch is that Lisa is the one who would be organizing the tickets, getting her group of friends together and say, yeah, we should all go and do this. So there's nuances between Lisa here and Amy. And so understanding those nuances in your audience and understanding they may be both fans of Duran Duran, to torture my analogy, but Lisa's probably the one who's going to be more take the bull by the horns and actually organize her group of friends to go see that. That's really important to understand too, because it allows you to target and to be more specific in your messaging. So this is but one tool that we love to use to really get into the specifics and the nuances of different groups and of different people. But what's important to know in general, and someone like Lisa, who is a visionary, is she probably aspires to be that visionary. And if we were to tell Lisa, who is again a fictional character, that she was a visionary, she would think, I'm pretty glad that people think that about me. And the concept here again around aspirational personal identity is that idea, that concept, that if people believe that they can have other people think slightly better about them than they may already do based on affiliation with a brand or an organization or another group, that can be very powerful. And it can be very powerful to truly understand for your organization, to get deeply and richly involved in understanding the recesses of the brains and things that your audience may themselves may not even fully understand. But if you can help them to get closer to that aspirational self through affiliation with you, that can be a very, very powerful thing. And we'll talk about how that can be a very powerful thing in their subsequent conversations around magnetism. So today we focused on that first key question, that question around what are your target audience's values and what's their aspirational personal identity. In our next session, we'll talk about how then in the mind of that target audience, is your organization helping to change the world? And the concept of being able to articulate how you're helping to change the world is becoming particularly important within today's day and age. So I'd encourage you to check us out some more. Stay in touch. Please copy down our newsletter information, sign up for our newsletter. That way you can hear about more of our webinars. And you can also download more of our content from our website by going to mcphie.ca and going to downloads. So thanks very much. Really appreciate your spending time with us today and have a great day.